used to work as a forest ranger in the Northwest a couple of years ago. I worked in an area with tons and tons of dense woods and several campsites and parks nearby as well. One night, probably around midnight, I was driving my truck down one of the quiet roads surrounded by woods when I noticed something on the road up ahead. As I got closer, I saw it was a man standing barely on the road and waving his arms over his head. I slowed down my vehicle, and as I approached the man, I saw him start pointing down into the woods. You really couldn't see more than a foot or so in the woods because of how dense it was this time of year, and with it being nighttime. As soon as I pulled over to the side of the road, I didn't even have time to get out of my truck before the man took off running into the woods. I was a little taken back by this, and I figured the man was in some kind of trouble. I got out my flashlight and looked to where the man had entered the woods. It wasn't a real path, but the brush and trees had been moved back in a way that it made a path through all the trees going deeper into the woods. I could see the man moving through the woods, and I called out to him if he needed help. The man yelled back to me that I had to come quick, and then he said something that sounded like his friend needed help, although I didn't really hear him very well. I followed quickly with tree branches and brush hitting me in the face and body as I did. I walked back for probably a minute or two before I completely lost sight of the man. He seemed to go off into a clearing of some sort. When I arrived at the clearing, I saw there was about 20 feet of open space. The grass in the area had been flattened a little. I shined my flashlight around this otherwise completely dark woods, expecting to see the man. However, after shining the light in all directions, I didn't see him. I scanned all over in the thick woods. I didn't see the man at all, so I stopped and listened. There was just silence. Then I started hearing noise in the woods behind me to where the path I came from was. I turned around and barely saw what appeared to be someone dodge the beam of my light and go deeper into the woods. I then heard more movements on the complete other side of the woods and flashed my light to see at least 2 people dart in different directions deeper into the woods. I announced myself as a forest ranger in a loud voice and told them whoever was there to come out. Instead, I just heard movements going farther away in all different directions. I got a bad feeling about the situation and figured it would be best for me to go back to my truck and get the local police department involved. I walked rather quickly back through the path and finally got back to my truck, which was still parked on the side of the road. I got inside and reported the situation. Then I waited until several units arrived. When they got there, we talked briefly. I drove down the road to inspect the rest of the area. About a mile or so down the road, I came across a car that was parked on the side, but it was more like off the road and was kind of sticking out of the woods. I went around and saw that there was nobody in the car, and it seemed to be abandoned. I called out asking if anybody was nearby, but I got no response. The plates of the car ended up being run, and it turned out to be a stolen vehicle. Nobody really turned up anything that night, and after that, the investigation fell out of my hands. I've been a park ranger for many years, but this story I'm about to tell you happened on just my first year of the job. I was young and relatively new to things. I was working at a large state park that also had a campsite nearby. At the time, I worked mainly nights, and I didn't mind it, but it did get a little bit spooky for me at times. On this one night, I was walking near one of the campsites like I often did at that time. I was headed back towards the park. It took me about 20 minutes to get back to the park. About halfway through the walk, I was startled by a noise coming from behind me. I looked over my shoulder and saw what appeared to be eyes staring back at me. It was too dark to see anything other than that, though. The eyes appeared to be next to a large tree. I knew it was some kind of animal, so I wasn't that concerned at all. But then I saw the eyes move from next to one tree to another tree that was closer to me. But the way it moved, it was just as if it sort of glided over. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. At that point, I reached for my flashlight without taking my eyes off of what I was seeing. I shined it to the area, and when I did, whatever was there completely disappeared. I saw nothing at all, and I didn't see any leaves or trees move as if something was running away. I suddenly felt pretty spooked. I asked if anyone was there, but I heard nothing. I shook my head and continued to walk back to the park, but at a faster speed. I told myself I was a park ranger and I shouldn't be scared, even though I was new to the job. Another minute later or so, I heard the noises again, this time in the woods beside me. I quickly looked over again, just in time to see a giant log flying directly towards me. The log looked to be huge. I scrambled to get out of the way and fell over trying to avoid it. It hit part of my arm as I fell to the ground, but luckily most of it missed me. It hurt pretty bad because of the size of the log. It had to be a good 5 feet long. I got up and ran to the nearest park building, where I called in to another ranger. We went back and examined the area, but found nothing suspicious. I have no idea what happened that night. I can't imagine anybody who could have the strength or the size to throw that log at me. I used to work summers at a park. I was hoping to become a park ranger after graduating college, and this was the closest I could get to doing it at the time. The park I worked at had a lake and a large wooded area with several paths going through it. My main job was to sit in a small building and collect money from cars as they entered the park, and then I would give them their parking passes. When the park would close, I was sort of a maintenance person, and I would go around the park in a golf cart to make sure everything was in order. Usually that meant picking up trash and things like that. One night, after a relatively normal day of work, I was on the golf cart driving through some of the paths in the woods. I drove past a few of the docks near the lake, and as I did, I heard some really loud splashing in the water. I figured someone was still fishing, so I stopped and then put the golf cart in reverse to let whoever was there know that the park was closed. I parked next to the entrance and walked onto the dock to see a man sitting at the end. I called out to him, and he turned around. He seemed to be pretty surprised to see me. He was wearing sunglasses and had a big hat. He also had a pretty long beard. It seemed strange, but I wasn't there to judge people. I just told him that the park was closed, and he responded by asking me if I could give him a lift back, pointing at my golf cart. He looked nice enough, so I said sure, and he hopped on next to me. He apologized for being out so late and said he had completely lost track of the time. I told him it was fine and not to worry about it. As we began to drive back, he started asking me questions about myself. I told him I was training to be a ranger one day and that I was currently in school. He then suddenly yelled to look out and pointed to the side of the path. I looked and saw a man from another connecting path wearing all black and a ski mask. He jumped in front of us and I stopped the golf cart. As I did, he approached, and then I felt the man I had picked up grab me from behind. The next thing I knew, I was pushed into the back of the golf cart, and the man in the ski mask got in the driver's seat. The other man held my arm so I couldn't escape. They demanded my phone, and then took it and threw it out into the woods as they drove down the paths. I was terrified, and I didn't know what was going to happen. We drove for about a minute or so, when we suddenly pulled to the side of the road. The man released his grip from my arm and shouted at me to just get out of here. I took off running and ran all the way back to my car, which was the only one left in the park parking lot. I drove home and then called the police. I'm sure by the time they got to the park, the men were long gone, but I gave as best a description of the one I saw as I could. I don't know why the men decided to let me go, but I'm really happy they did.